I've spent many years living in Japan, 8 years, close to a decade. And that's a highly conformist society, right? But people tend to follow the rules, very law-abiding and all of that. Well, there exists a subculture within Japanese society called bosakozu. And the bosakozu are these rebel motorcycle gangs that ride around making a hell of a racket everywhere they go. They wear the old, they carry the old imperial flag of Japan with the sun and its rays coming out of it. And you can find them in the big cities of Tokyo, Osaka, and things like that. And they kind of pride themselves of living outside the norms of society and being anti-establishment and all of that. Well, what's really interesting about the bosakozu culture is that they all dress the same way. They all have the same kinds of bikes. They use the same kind of language, and they show up at the same times and congregate and behave in a very conformist way within that subculture. And so it's interesting to me that every time there is some kind of uprising against the dominant culture, whether that be a political revolution or some kind of a spiritual new way of talking or thinking or criticizing what is the dominant culture, eventually over time that becomes a culture of its own. And we've seen that with Buddhism, which, the Buddha's teachings, as pragmatic as they were 2,000 years ago or 2,500 years ago, have completely turned into something else, right? If you especially go into Southeast Asia and you see the forms of Buddhism practiced there, or in Japan with Pure Land Buddhism, it's very similar to Christianity, really. So I want you to comment on that, if you can, about how culture forms, the genesis of culture, even if it starts from a very original place, how it distorts over time.
So that's a funny image, the Japanese Hells Angels. So that's tribalism. It feels good to be a member of a group and to be accepted and to be seen and to have a home to go to and all of this. The problem with being a member of a group is then you are infected with the group mind. And the group mind may not be the best approach to living, probably isn't. I'm much more interested in individuality. I want to know what I see, what I think, what I care about, and not have that explained to me by some authority figure. And so, as you point out, in Japan, these people are rebels, and yet when they form a group, they become subjected to the group mind. Many people in contemporary culture want to be a member of a tribe actively. They want to, people will say, I want to find my tribe. I want to find my tribe. And one example of tribalism that's going on right now, Joan Tollefson and I have been discussing this now for several months, I think productively. I like hearing from her. She's a good friend. One example is the transsexual movement, which I think began, I should say at the outset that I'm not a critic of transsexuality in any sense. In fact, I have two transsexual people in my life that I love very much. One is recently deceased, but I had him for many years. And my other transsexual friend is still living and doing well. And I love her. So this is not a critique of transsexuals. It's a critique of this tribalism that has established certain boundaries for what can be said and how, And if someone violates those boundaries, that person is punished by this tribe. So this tribe is a nasty manifestation of stupidity, which makes all kinds of claims that cannot be backed up. For example, that sex is not binary. It certainly is binary. People are male or female when they're born. Yes, there's a tiny percentage, a small fraction of 1% of people whose genitals or DNA might not be clearly male or female, but that's tiny. For the most part, people don't have a sex that they were assigned at birth, which is nasty language. They have the sex with which they were born. If I say that now, I am considered an enemy of transsexuals, and I'm not. I'm not an enemy of transsexuals because I say that a child of 6 or 7 can't be trans. They don't know who they are yet. They must be allowed to live longer and find out who they are. But no, we want to take the word of a 6-year-old child about what medical interventions are necessary. It's insane. And if I point that out, I am pointing it out right now, and I'll probably get some hate mail when you put this thing on the internet. That's how it goes. Just like you got this big pushback for this last article of yours that I read. I laughed. I thought it was really funny because the same thing has happened to me. And your critics are so stupid, and I guess you must feel that way about them. Do you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm open to criticism. I always encouraged it, but the criticism has to arise from a rational place where we can then further the discussion. But when there's a shutting down of, oh, this sounds disgusting to me, then obviously, there's no intelligence there. It's just a purely emotional and reactionary response. And to your point, Robert, it's not just 6 and 7-year-olds. In fact, where I live in Canada now, and especially in the province of British Columbia, which seems to be at the forefront of this kind of identity politics, it's being mandated down to the daycare level, where daycare teachers are not allowed to address children as young as 2 and 3 by their gender, by their sex, biological sex. They're not allowed to refer to a boy as a he or a girl as a she, because that would be them assuming the child's gender, and the child's gender is still up for debate. And that's become the policy, the public policy in place. But I see that all of this manifesting as part of a wider problem, which we actually touched upon earlier, where this is just an example of that Platonic ideal on crack, where now we have an entire generation, and driven by a lot of political investment, the entire political establishment asserting that the ideal only is true, and that the fact of your life is actually entirely ambiguous. It's very bizarre, but that's the underlying assumption. That's what allows all of this rhetoric to fuel, is them saying, look, you're saying biological sex is binary. What I'm saying is it's not even real. What's real is what I feel about myself, and that is the social construct of gender. And that only should be considered, and we should completely neglect any facts of birth. They're just inconvenient facts that we want to sweep under the carpet. And that's a very dangerous, slippery slope to embark on, because where's the line in the sand then? Where do we say reality actually begins? Does it just begin in what I want to say about myself?
Yeah, that's a great analysis. That's about the Platonic ideals being embraced and the individuality being swept under the carpet. So I do think gender is fluid, and of course it is, and we all know that. And so is sexuality. I mean, homosexuality is a fact. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just one manifestation of human sexuality. And I certainly can understand how someone who was born in a male body could want to have the gender role that's more like what women have. There's nothing really wrong with that, in my view. What's wrong with that, in my view, in my opinion, is to distort biology entirely so that you can have your feelings about what you are. It's madness. In my opinion, and this is a very strongly held opinion, I must say, a woman is a mature human female. She was a girl, and then she became a woman. Now, when she was a girl, if she says, I don't really feel like a girl, I feel like a boy, okay, that's understandable. And the more that culture divides the way that the two sexes are permitted to express their humanity, the more compelling it might feel to redefine oneself in a gender role. That sounds complex. Let me break it down a little. If I'm a tomboy, let's say, in a more rational society, there wouldn't be any problem with being a girl, but doing things that boys like to do, or dress like a boy and grow up to do the kinds of things that men are allowed to do that women are not allowed to do. That was a culture that I grew up in. There was a very well-defined split between male roles and female roles. That's disappearing now. And I think that if it really disappeared entirely, there would not be this need to change bodies so much, which I find bizarre. All of this sexuality to me is really sad. Well, now I've really put my foot in it, so I'm now I'm expecting. I've gone on about this because to me this is one of the basic issues that mitigates against intelligence. People are being forced to, in public, to act stupider than they really are, because if they really express what they know and feel in themselves, they might lose their position in society. And
well, it's bizarre to me that anything such as a taboo subject exists anymore. And there's actually plenty of them. They're proliferating every day. And I think you and I are just wanting to, as two curious intellectual individuals, talk about something. It doesn't mean you're right or I'm right, but why should we not be allowed to discuss it in fear that it might offend somebody or we might get blowback for expressing a point of view? It's that is truly dystopian to me, that's even a consideration anymore, right? But I'm very much of the mindset that you are, Robert, in that bizarrely, and I don't know if people see this, that this very discussion about changing genders reinforces those gender stereotypes. It assumes that there is something that it means to be a man, and that is something that it means to be a woman. And so perhaps, someone who's born in a female body who exhibits traits of dominance and greater levels of aggression and things like that might feel that there's an expectation of society that she be more agreeable and not assert herself as much and things like that. And so she thought, well, if I was just a guy, then this would not be an issue.
Yeah, I think you said it very well. I was going to comment further, but I think the basic idea here is don't be stupid. It's really simple. Don't be stupid. Don't let anybody tell you that sex is assigned at birth. That's an absurd locution that's being enforced upon us. Also, the need to call everyone they. That's stupidity. That's stupidity. And the problem with that kind of stupidity is that it's being enforced. Many people who are really intelligent are forced to talk stupid because if they don't, they'll lose their job at the university or the corporation or whatever it is. And that's, to me, that's very sad. We need to be as smart as we can, not make ourselves stupid. So I think I've beat that horse to death now.